I'm Leah Brick. I'm the executive director of SASH, and I'm just so thrilled that you are with us tonight. And I'm really excited for the information that Raven's going to be sharing from her research and the research of just some really incredible researchers. So Raven, I'm going to turn it over to you and let you get started. And we just know that every once in a while I might pop in here if something piques my interest to talk about, and we'll just have a great little chat here. Thanks so much for being with us.
Thank you so much, Dr. Leah, for that amazing introduction. Greetings, everyone. I am so ecstatic to have the honor and pleasure of being in conversation with you all tonight and utilizing the Society of Sexual Advancement of Sexual Health platform to discuss a relevant topic. So again, before jumping into kind of like conversation in the presentation today, I want to again thank Dr. Leah for offering this amazing opportunity to me. Again, yes, we did meet at Quad S this past year. It was an amazing conference. I was able to kind of build a lot of connection and build a social network where the research that I am collaborating with and co-authoring on is being respected and seen as necessary and pretty relevant in today's society. So without further ado, let's jump straight in. So today we're going to be getting into Good Girls Don't Do Things Like That, a reflection of Black women's masturbation messages. All right, so this is a slide where I have my Instagram where you all can essentially stay up to date in terms of the research that I'm doing, the kind of information that I'm able to disperse regarding the information, because I understand that research articles are hard to access, particularly for individuals who I am interested in serving through my research, which are Black folk. And through the media, through social media, I believe that the platform will be able to essentially communicate information that is quite kind of, there's a certain terminology or vocabulary that's being used that's not as accessible for just ordinary people who aren't in academia. And just to also give you all a bit more information about who I am a second-year postdoctoral student in the counseling psychology program at the University of Kentucky. And I have the honor and pleasure of being advised by Dr. Candace Nicole Hargans. And most of my research is broadly focused on and guided by social justice activism related to mental health accessibility, awareness, and overall well-being among the Black community, including sex and sexuality. And again, today's conversation, we're going to kind of talk about topics related to socialization of Black women. So we'll get into like the sexual socialization of Black women and transition into Black women and sexuality researchers. So the individuals who are championing our stories and really putting our narratives out there that are authentic and genuine. And then lastly, we'll talk about the research, particularly related to Black women masturbation. And if you all, again, have any questions throughout, please drop them in the Q&A kind of section of the little box down there. So to get into the historical socialization of Black women. So by means, and I want to get into this by means of media, to kind of attack this, or not attack it, but kind of approach it in a way by means of media. And we know that we consume media on a day-to-day basis, whether it's television, TikTok, social media, music, movies, and so forth. There are things that have been communicated across several generations, and those kind of socialization pieces is essentially providing an appropriate kind of way by which someone should behave in a smaller group within a larger society. So for instance, if I identify as a Black woman, there are guidelines by which I must follow to exist in a large society. And we're going to get into that. So when we think about the historical kind of upbringing of Black women, specifically as it relates to sex and sexuality, we have to speak about the oppressive, limiting stereotypes and caricatures that Western white and patriarchal society has essentially forced upon Black women. First, the mammy. So the mammy stereotype is essentially the Black woman who was at times falling into the darker complexion and essentially dedicated to domestic services and being the person, the woman who served as the motherly figure or the one that was raising the slave master's children. So the mammy was someone who was associated with characteristics and qualities of being subordinate, self-sacrificing, and nurturing. And in addition to that, there's also this kind of quality about the mammy that essentially negates or strips away her sexual being or her being a sexual being or individual. She's been categorized as someone who doesn't deserve or is viewed as sexual. And the only thing that the mammy really adheres to or is able to provide is service and nurturing. And then we can get into the sapphire. So the sapphire stereotype is the Black woman who is bossy. And it also aligns with the angry Black woman as well, kind of stereotype. The headstrong woman who really doesn't need anyone. She's hyper independent and bad tempered. And in addition to that, I kind of put an image of Tachina Arnold, who was the mother in Everybody Hates Chris for Chris Rock's mother. And if you've ever seen the show, she was very kind of like a headstrong woman who was super bossy or bad tempered. And in the media, kind of like depiction of the sapphire, that's an ideal kind of depiction of that stereotypical kind of caricature or ideal image of how Black women should adhere to these expectations of what a sapphire is. And then lastly, the Jezebel. This is the stereotype that is associated with the heterosexual Black, or not the heterosexual Black woman, but the hypersexual Black woman. And in this case, this is the seductress, and there's this rationalization of sexual relationships or relations. So this means, particularly during the time of slavery, when Black women were subjected to sexual abuse, rape, and so forth, the Jezebel stereotype or that label being attached to Black women during that time essentially gave reasoning behind or a rationale to the reasoning behind Black women receiving sexual abuse. And then additional kind of characteristics or qualities that may be associated with the Jezebel is the alluring, the worldly, the lewd, the tempting, and the seductive. And kind of just to summarize all of that information, these stereotypes and caricatures have played a major role in a way that the larger society views Black women sexually and socially. And even Black women have essentially internalized these messages and expectations of how a Black woman should essentially maneuver and exist and how to show up in society, but also as sexual beings. And it is important to mention that there are media creators, directors, musicians, artists, and so forth who are currently kind of debunking these negative stereotypes, but also there are some who are consuming these roles and kind of giving it and taking it back from this negative connotation instead of allowing themselves to fall prey into, again, the white, cisgendered, patriarchal, Western civilized kind of expectation of how Black women should be. And then to transition into who is championing our stories. So I think it's very essential and very important to really name and give the flowers to individuals who are doing the work related to really communicating the authentic, raw, unfiltered kind of narratives that Black women are experiencing, particularly as it relates to their sexuality, their sexual debut, and all of their sexual experiences, to ensure that not only that we are represented well, but we are represented authentically. And then with that representation, it allows for adequate and efficient kind of programming related to things that will ensure that Black women are receiving kind of ultimate, maybe healthcare services related to sexual practices and so forth. And the names I'm going to kind of mention this evening are just a few to kind of initiate your journey into getting kind of accustomed or aware other people who are in the field of sexuality research. But these women are not the only individuals who are doing the work or who have done the work. So I hope that these names and their kind of like social medias really propel you into a beautiful journey of collecting and gathering so much awareness related to Black sexuality. So first, Dr. Thorpe, her ad is Dr. Shamika. So she does a lot of research that is geared to sex positivity and really not approaching sex research in a way that is risk-based and wants to bring the pleasure aspect of what sex is for Black individuals. And then we have Dr. June Dawes Butts. She was the first African-American sex therapist. She really was based in advocating around honest discussions on topics about masturbation, bisexuality, and gender reassignment. And she's also a Spelman sister. And then Natalie Malone, she is currently working alongside Dr. Hargans as well in the Research Squared Lab. And she is doing amazing research, and she continues to make sure that she is providing the real raw stories of Black individuals, Black folk, Black women, Black queer folk who their sexuality stories. Dr. Coleman and Dr. Nikki Knows, she is also a sex therapist, and she also has an amazing TikTok where she really gets into kind of the things that tend to happen in session related to her work as a therapist, but she's also done a lot of research related to race and culture and also sex. And then we also have Dr. Jenkins Hall. She's also, she has a role as an educator, a researcher, and she also does work related to Black sexuality. And lastly, Miss Shauna, she's amazing, and she's also a Spelman sister. And a lot of her work really centers around the erotica of Black women, and particularly as it relates to media. And her Instagram is amazing, and the images of Black women, Black folk that she kind of like has is this mosaic of just beauty and resilience and radicalism, but also erotica. And then Dr. Towns, Dr. Ashley Towns, she also does research related to Black sexuality, particularly historical kind of lens, and kind of looking at it to the generations and historically the kind of the development, and also kind of just the changes that have happened historically as it relates to sexuality and sex, health, and wellness. And also Dr. Hargans, Dr. Candace Nicole, she is also the developer or the creator, along with Dr. Thorpe, of hashtag Hot Girl Science, which I will touch on a little bit later. But she also does work that is also pleasure centered. So she is dedicated to not focusing on the risk of kind of like HIV and STDs and so forth, but speaking to the pleasure of what sex is all about for Black individuals. And then Dr. Elders. And I'll get a bit more into kind of how she kind of relates to particularly the research that myself and a few of my colleagues have done. And to also mention, Dr. Towns will be also doing a talk similar to what I am doing, I believe March 14th, And Dr. Leah, I know that you wanted to kind of mention that to the audience.
Yeah, so if you're interested in Dr. Townsend's work, she just published a paper and she's going to be talking about it on March 14th, which just happens to be Steak and Blowjob Day. And her talk is called Oral Sex and the Pleasure Gap, Findings from a Study of Black Adolescents and Adults. And we're going to drop the link to that into the chat. So that way, if you're interested in attending that, it's free also. It's in the evening. And so we hope that you'll do that. And I just want to say also that several of these researchers, Dr. Towns, Dr. Hargans, Dr. Thorpe, several of the others are on our researchers page. So if you want to know more about their research, you can go to the SASH website and go to the sexual health researchers, and you'll be able to find all of their ResearchGate listings there. And I'm super proud to say that Dr. Hargans was our research award winner last year at our annual conference for her amazing work.
Thank you so much for really shining a light on letting everyone know that you all can access their kind of like information via your website and really take their names and kind of run with it. Get to know a little bit more information about the work they're doing, because they're doing amazing and dope work right now. So just to jump straight into kind of like the research that myself, Dr. Thorpe, Natalie, Dr. Hargans, Dr. Coleman, and another colleague by the name of Jackson have done as it relates to masturbation. First, let's get into the controversy of masturbation. So as I mentioned, Dr. Elders was very radical during the 1990s, really kind of not pressuring, but really advocating for more safer kind of practices with sex, particularly as it relates to masturbation, to ensure that there's a reduction in unsafe sexual behaviors among individuals during the 1990s. However, during that time, people were very reluctant and kind of pushed back towards her kind of advocacy related to masturbation. And that really speaks to the information I will get into in the kind of like the analyses and the overall things that we were able to gather from the data that we were able to kind of analyze for our article and our paper. So I first want to give again another big shout out to Dr. Hargans and Dr. Thorpe, but also my Rise Squared research family, who conducted a phenomenal study to share the sexual experiences, perspective, and etc. of Black folk. And this was during February and March of 2021, where they initiated the Big Sex Study. It's a triphasic mixed method, hashtag Hot Girl Science. So hashtag Hot Girl Science, again, is a liberatory intersectional paradigm for sex science. And it essentially is a way to study the fun, sex positive aspects of Black sexualities and essentially move towards liberation, focus inquiry, where pleasure is essentially the center. It is the focus. It's not that risk-based kind of focus as it relates to Black sexuality and Black sexual experiences. And it was also founded upon hip hop feminism, hood feminism, and the work of Black feminism scholars past and also present. So there are like 4 kind of concepts or criteria that can be met while utilizing the paradigm, which is doing me unapologetically, having fun, sex positivity, but also hyping up my friends. So the paradigm is really not something that should be kind of incorporated only in your analysis, but it's the entire research process from beginning to end, where this hashtag Hot Girl Science paradigm is implemented, but also taken into kind of how data is collected, how participants are selected, and so forth. So it's not just, oh, we use this for the conclusion or the discussion and analysis part, but it's the entire process. So as it relates to our masturbation article, we looked at the qualitative response of what messages did you receive about masturbation and or self-pleasure. And we were able to look at this through a thematic analysis. So we were searching for themes that were relevant across kind of responses of about 242 participants, and to see if there were any commonalities of kind of responses as it related to their messages. And the main themes that we were able to kind of pull from the data from the 242 individuals, we were able to see that there were negative messages, no messages, positive messages, neutral messages, but also mixed messages. So mixed messages was a combination of like every theme that is on the slide that you see, but there were also ones that were neutral. But I won't get too much into the neutral ones. I'll be focusing more on the negative, positive, no messages, but also mixed messages. And I also want to mention that our research and our data has something to say. So about 97.1% of Black women reported masturbating in their entire lifetime. So out of that 242 individuals, 97.1 of them indicated that they have participated in masturbation or engaged in masturbating. And to get into the positive messages, so some positive messages that Black women have been receiving as it relates to masturbation is sexual self-awareness, partner interactions, health benefits, and empowering. So sexual awareness essentially is knowing or being aware of your sexual kind of needs or anything of that will essentially be able to be successful in your pleasure. And then partner interactions was more geared to, oh, I'll know what my partner needs to do to ensure that I get my ultimate pleasure. Health benefits were just health benefits that could be a result of engaging in masturbation, but also empowering. It's empowering to know or be self-aware of your sexual pleasure. It's empowering to know or be able to provide the information to your partner and know that you will receive pleasure. And I've also included kind of examples of what the positive messages were like from our participants. So we have one here that says, I was encouraged to masturbate by my mother as a teenager. This was her way of honoring that I was curious and encouraging me to explore in a way I wouldn't get pregnant. Masturbate while you manifest. As a woman, I am responsible and capable of my own pleasure, own it, and if I want to, I can share my self-pleasure with others. So you have that partner interaction there, and you have the empowerment is in both of these kind of depictions or kind of like segments of individuals' responses. And then we go into the negative messages. So the negative messages is rooted in kind of messages related to sinfulness, sexist, being dirty, shameful, negative health consequences, or relationship issues. So the sinful, dirty, and shameful really fall under the kind of like religious or religion kind of category on umbrella. And to show just a bit of those kind of responses, good girls don't do things like that, which is the title of this presentation. And as a woman, it's shameful, but it's normal for men. So we had that sexist kind of language and messaging that was being received. And it's not necessary, since it's the man job to please you, it's how you hold off to avoid men. So it's going into that good girl trope, but it's also kind of stripping the Black woman of their like being advocates and also individuals who are in control of their own self-pleasure. And then we get into mixed messages. So this is a combination of negative and positive messages, negative and neutral messages, positive and neutral messages, or just no messages at all. For instance, my parents just really didn't talk about it. It can be a sin or a self-care. There's no in between. So it's more of like on two opposite ends of the spectrum. Is either it's a sin or a self-care, nothing else. And then in the negative sense, I received that it was wrong, not good to do. In a positive sense, I received great feedback surrounding the idea of masturbating being the ultimate safe sex and how we are made to explore our bodies and how beautiful it is to be able to do so on our own or on your own before inviting a partner in. So also in that, one kind of quote, there's also this kind of like change, or this change of messaging across the lifespan as well, kind of having like, oh, there's a negative sense at the beginning, but it can also be a positive sense as maybe going or getting more accustomed to certain things, or being exposed to certain things, or experiencing more socialization to really get access to more understanding of what masturbation is. And then no messages, participants who did not receive positive, negative, or neutral messages throughout their entire lifespan. So not talked about at all, none as a minor, not much to be honest, and none really. And then the sources of the messages. So where were these messages coming from? Like the negative, the positive, but also the mixed, and maybe even no messages at all. So many of the participants indicated sources being sex educators. So some people, in terms of the positive or even the transition from negative to positive messages, aka the mixed messages, those were from sex educators. Religion, most of the information or the messages that were received from religion were negative or negative connotations. And then we have parents, it was a mixture, friends, a mixture of messages, media, mixture, family, also a mixture, but a bulk of them were more of the mixture messages on the latter end of the sources. And to get into particularly, I want to focus on the Black church, but I'm also going to focus on the family. So as it relates to religion, the Black church, Brittany Cooper in the year of 2018, she spoke to the influence of the church as it relates specifically to the demonization of Black women and their experiences with pleasure, essentially sexual pleasure. And when I think about religion, particularly the Black church and the Black community, the Black church is essentially a major influence in how many Black folk are socialized. And also myself being brought up in a Baptist church, I know of a number of teachings that have been or related to sexuality, purity, and devotion and so forth that was quite limiting for myself as a Black woman. And again, the Black church and religion being a dominating source for messages for Black women, it was throughout their early childhood, and it served as a guidebook for the Black community, Black church. And the information and messages were ultimately limiting in the exploration of many of our Black women participants throughout their exploration of sexual self-pleasure and engaging in masturbation. And here are a few quotes that are particularly related to kind of the impact or the messages that Black women received from like the church and religion. That is ungodly and sinful. Anyone who participates should not only feel immense shame, but should also be aware they're going to hell. Growing up in an old-fashioned Black family and church and being in white evangelical spaces communicated to me that all sex, masturbation included, was sinful. So there were messages that really shamed the participation in active masturbation within the church, particularly the Black church, as it relates for the Black community. And that kind of built a not wanting to participate in masturbation or engage in that behavior because of the cautionary kind of messages being related to it being sinful or shameful. And then the family. So this is another dominating source in messaging, and it tends to be a mixed message kind of source. And these messages were tending to align with teachings from the religion. And as I mentioned, the Black community was very much, or is very much impacted and socialized by the Black church. So most of the messages and the values and so forth that the family, particularly the Black family, has is going to be also communicated. And another kind of part of the messages that Black women were receiving was also to maintain safety and respectability. So that also goes back to the stereotypes that I was mentioning earlier at the beginning of the presentation, kind of wanting to push or not push and neglect the fact that Black women don't have to adhere to these stereotypes of being a Jezebel. I'm particularly coming from the family is more of like, I want my Black daughter to ensure that she's not falling or being subjected to that stereotype. However, those mixed messages also have communicated other things as it relates to, again, maintaining the respectability of every, particularly the Black woman. And then here are a few quotes that kind of speak to Black women and their experiences with their family and the messages that they received. My mom always taught me after I turned 9 that masturbation is a natural and normal thing. So we have a positive kind of message that participants received from their mom. And then I grew up with a lot of strong Black women who were clear about their sexual desires and expectations of their partners. Masturbation was discussed some, but not often. However, sexual pleasure was a common topic of hushed conversation with just my aunts and cousins. So yes, the conversations were happening, but it was more of a taboo conversation, or a conversation that was really hush hush and not to be talked about more in open kind of conversations among all family members. And then what now? So after learning and understanding that these are, or the messages that Black women have received about masturbation span across negative, positive, no messages, mixed messages, and so forth, Black women need spaces to process the harmful messages they received about masturbation. And they need that through counseling and workshops that are sex positive, counseling that is sex positive, that also understands the lived experiences of Black women, and understand that there are certain sources of information that Black women have been able to digest and consume and internalize over their entire lifespan that are essential or central to their upbringing, the family, the Black church, very foundational, and to really be able to be in these spaces, whether it's counseling, workshops, programming, and so forth, where they feel safe. So safe spaces have to be curated for Black women as they're able to process through these messages that they've been able to receive. And then again, comprehensive sex education needs to be inclusive of masturbatory practices. So when comprehensive sex education workshops, programming, and so forth is curated, ensure that masturbation is included and talked about, and not kind of left from the backside or the back burner. It's more, it's much more than speaking to contraception or understanding when to utilize condoms and so forth, but it's also providing additional information about, you can also participate and utilize or engage in masturbation as a form of sexual pleasure and sexual activity. And here is the published article kind of reference or citation. You can take a picture of that. I'll also send out the slides if you all are interested. You can have that. But this is where you all can read a bit more in depth into more of what the data told us about masturbation as it relates to Black women. And I also want to give acknowledgement and thank you to the Rise Square team again, our community partners, and the commitment and assistance during the phase 1 of the Big Sex study.
I'll turn my camera on so you can see me. Let me get over there. I am. So we had a couple of questions that came up, and if any of you have questions, be sure and drop those into the Q&A for me so that I can get to those for Raven. The first one, Raven, was about the term sapphire and where the term sapphire comes from as a descriptor for the angry Black woman.
Mm-hmm. That's a great question. So when engaging in reading a bit of the literature, I came across the sapphire and related it to the angry Black woman. It wasn't specifically outlined in the literature as this is related to the angry Black woman, but the characteristics and the qualities as they explain the sapphire to be, I associated that with the angry Black woman myself. So that's not in terms of like the same thing, but in my kind of interpretation and digestion of the literature, I was more relating it to the angry Black woman.
Mm-hmm. And so I think the term, where the term comes from, and that was part of what I was curious about too, is how does the term even come about, the sapphire? Like where does that come from? And I don't know if you discovered that in your work at all.
Yeah, I didn't get to discover that into the work that I was utilizing with the masturbation paper, but we were talking about this off the record when we were speaking about how these stereotype names came to be. Speaking of and thinking, where did the mammy come from? Where did the sapphire come from? Where did the Jezebel come from? Where did these kind of names, where did they develop these from, and how did they come to be as it
Right.
relates to Black women particularly?
So I actually was really curious about that because I mean, as I said to you when we've talked before, like they don't have a particular name for a white woman other than like bitch or slut or whore, but it's not, it's not a term like the sapphire. And so I was doing some research and I discovered that it actually comes from a show, a old show long time ago called Amos and Andy. And there was a woman in the show. Her name was Sapphire Stevens, and she was always berating her husband. And so that it seems like that's maybe where it came from, is those three, the maybe from Gone with the Wind and the Sapphire from Sapphire Stevens in that show. Um, so let's get to some of these other questions. There's a question about if in the source of the messaging, any of it came from pornography.
Mm. And sources of messaging, was a pornography a source? I don't recall that being a prominent source, but it was mentioned a few times, but it wasn't enough to say, oh, this is a major source of information and messaging that Black women are receiving. But definitely, yes, pornography was a source that was mentioned. However, it wasn't a prominent one.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, so then the next question is, have you seen a difference in prominent messages around masturbation based on the individual's sexuality?
That is a great question. And I got that question at Quad S as well. And when we were doing the study, we weren't looking particularly at sexuality differences. We were more highlighting just the overall experience of Black women. But I do think it's very interesting, or it could be very interesting, to really look into the differences between sexuality and the engagement in source and also messages that were received for individuals who essentially fall on the sexuality spectrum. That's a good question.
Yeah, it's a really good question. So here we are with another one. And the question is, are there any strategies or tips to encourage positive messaging of sexual pleasure for Black women, particularly adolescents?
That's a great question as well. So in thinking, or my own personal kind of insight into different strategies and tips to encourage positive messaging is really to provide sex positive knowledge about what masturbation is, and ensuring that Black women and also Black adolescents are being kind of provided with awareness and knowledge that isn't based in kind of like sinfulness, anything that really scares or kind of pushes this negative perception of what masturbation is onto the person. So ensuring that it's rooted in sex positivity and encouraging the exploration, a safe exploration of a person's kind of like sexual being.
Yeah, for sure. And I'm curious, there may be some of that discussion in Dr. Ashley Towns's presentation, because she is going to be talking about oral sex and pleasure, but
Yeah.
her study is around adolescents and adults. And I know that there was some discussion in there around masturbation messages as well. So there may be some in that study. So we'll find out in a couple of weeks.
I'm sure y'all go to that.
One of the next questions is around the 3 stereotypes and whether those were considered the top 3 stereotypes, because there are more, and whether those were the top 3 for your research.
So with the stereotypes, I included the stereotypes for this presentation to really give us a kind of base of understanding of what the socialization of Black women have been as it relates to their sexuality. We weren't looking at the stereotypes in our study. We were more focused on the types of messages that they were receiving in the sources. But there are absolutely more than 3 stereotypes that Black women have been forced to really, or have been forcefully labeled as, that would also fall into kind of like, if we were to dig deeper into analyzing the messages that Black women did receive about masturbation, I'm sure that we'll definitely be able to associate them with the stereotypes as well.
Yeah, I wouldn't doubt that. Next question is, are there any geographic differences in the messages based on location? So Southern Black communities versus somewhere like Chicago or LA.
That is an amazing question. Because my mind, when it thinks about regional differences, will definitely go through, yeah, there'll be some differences there in the messages. But based on our study, we didn't get into the regions as well. But just my own kind of thoughts about it, I would definitely see a difference in the messages, particularly whether it's more negative or more mixed. And in terms of like the Southern kind of region, I would definitely see more of like the negative messages that were being communicated, and then also it being rooted and tied to religion in the Black church as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. That's my impression as well. There's so much rooted in the South in negative messages, and so tied to religion.
Yeah.
I don't see any other questions up here. So I just, I'm so appreciative of your work and the work of Dr. Thorpe and Dr. Hargans, and gosh, what some just kick-ass researchers. I'm so appreciative of the work that they're doing. It just is really so not only needed, but um, it edifies everybody, right? And I think I was telling you, when I was working on my dissertation and was looking for research, and especially specific to women of color that had gotten into executive leadership positions, I couldn't find anything. And I was really, really grateful that I had one participant. I wished I had more, but I was so grateful I had at least one woman of color to participate in my research, because her story was so different than everyone else's. And it just told me that I needed to do more, that was a whole group of people that were being missed when it came to executive leadership, and research being done on how they were breaking the glass ceiling, because that's what my research was on, was how are women breaking the glass ceiling. And There just were no women that I could find. Let's go to a couple more questions. So, did your study address childhood or adult trauma and masturbation?
Mm. We did not get into the childhood or adult trauma as it relates to masturbation. Sadly, there's so many different things that there could have been so many different approaches to this paper. And just hearing you all's questions just has me thinking about additional articles and
Right.
aims to just this particular kind of uh base of data. Like there's so many ways that we can interpret the data and the responses to what masturbation messages or what messages you receive about masturbation and sexual self-pleasure. And thinking about trauma as or sexual trauma, childhood and also adult trauma being maybe an influencer and how masturbation messages were received and or implemented.
Mhm. But it's kind of dual trauma though too, right? Because what if it's a parent's trauma and not a child's trauma? What if it's a parent's child and their message about masturbation to their child because of their own experience? So
Mm,
that would be interesting as well.
yeah.
So much more research that can be done. That's the thing you find out, right? You're doing your research, you finish it up, and you're like, okay, well, what else could we have? Where did we miss some pieces that really could be addressed too? Where can we take this further? Here's another question for you, and this is sort of a personal one. What resonated for you the most throughout your research?
Mm. What has resonated with me the most? I think the thing that resonated with me the most is that research about Black women, Black non-conforming individuals, Black queer folk doesn't have to be approached deficitly. So we can approach our lived experiences as Black people, even though we experience so much oppression, so much racism, sexism, and so forth. There is an opportunity for us to really analyze and get into our lives in a way that is not rooted in kind of like a deficit or a risk model. We can approach it with liberation. We can approach it with positivity because Black people are experiencing pleasure and it is a reality. And that's something that resonates the most with me in terms of this research that I've been able to participate in.
Yeah, I love that. I really love that. I like to spend more time in joy
Mm,
than in deprivation and in negativity. And so really finding like, okay, there's been some contrast in my life and things that have been difficult, and but that's what brought me here.
mhm.
And that's what is helping me to see where I don't want to be and where I want to go, you know.
Yeah.
And that's an amazing thing. I want to give a shout out, just a few things for people as we're winding down our time here. If you're interested in hearing something from Dr. Thorpe on our website, we do have a webinar that she did for us this past July, on women's sexual pain. And so that's a video on demand if you're interested in that. And then again, Dr. Ashley Towns will be speaking in a couple of weeks, little less than 2 weeks, on her study. And then Shauna Shipley Gates, I'm in conversation with her because her research is so important, and trying to set something up for her as well. So just watch your email. And if you're not on our email list, be sure to get on it and know that we are very interested in the research of these people and the work that they're doing. Just such incredible things for us to know. So everyone is saying thank you so much and appreciated your presentation. And Again, I'm just so grateful to you, Raven, for being with us and sharing your knowledge and sharing your information. And I look forward to more to come, right? More research, more conversations. So thank you, everyone, for being with us, and we will see you again soon.
Thank you all.